Hey, welcome back to this week's segment of Midwest Outdoors. I'm Tony Roach. We're casting some crankbaits today. You want to talk about having the right tool for the right job? The new Legend glass rods from St. Croix are the ultimate in casting crankbaits. As you can see, there's a spinning model. There's also a casting model. I'm going to be throwing some really light crankbaits like the Rapala Shad Dancers on the spinning models. And on the casting models, we're gonna throw some DTs, maybe a few bigger crankbaits, but it's unbelievable how far you can cast these baits when you have the right rod. There we go, a little smallmouth. It is unreal how far you can hook these baits out there. You know, I'm using this little Shad Dancer. It's a small, little teeny balsa bait. If you've ever casted like a Shad Rap or a Shad Dancer, you know how difficult it is to cast, especially in the wind. Man, with this rod, it's no problem. Get this guy back in the water. You know, casting crankbaits is not only a fun way to fish, an exciting way to fish, it's a great way to power fish and to cover water. What I mean by power fishing is I can pull into an area like this. I've got a series of reefs. I could pitch those reefs. I want to find out where these fish are located along here. It's also a great multi-species tool. You know, you catch everything from walleyes to bass to pike, whatever's biting. You can panfish at times. I love casting crankbaits, and this rod really allows me to get these baits out to where I need to be. When you're casting crankbaits, a lot of times it's all about those long casts. You know, those fish follow it for a long ways, and you want to make sure that you're covering multiple depths as you're running this bait. Some of these fish are sitting right up on top, some are fishing on the edge, and the key to that whole element are these long casts. Another one. Some bass located on the edge of this reef here. You know, this time of year, it always seems like the bass, the pike, the walleyes, they're all kind of in those same locations. Man, I love the way that rod loads up. I'll show you exactly what I mean. When you're fishing these crankbaits, this has a medium moderate action, so you can see it's a glass rod, so it's got plenty of backbone. It also allows me to really rear back, load up that crankbait and cast it out there. But the other nice thing about the power and action of this particular rod from St. Croix is just the way it loads up. When you have a crankbait, you don't want to fish too stiff a rod, because what happens is they hit it and you miss a lot of fish as a result. This one loads up super nice. I love it when a fish hits a crankbait on the crank end. I mean, they just stop it and you could feel it in that rod. Just it loads up just perfectly. And the thing is, when I'm casting the spinning rod, I'm generally using like a braided line with a fluorocarbon leader. I like that fluorocarbon option just for the abrasion resistant factor alone, but also there's no stretch and no stretch. Oh, nice smallmouth. But when I'm throwing my casting rod, I'm generally using, you know, that fluorocarbon. I love that new advanced fluorocarbon from Suffolk. It fishes a lot like a mono. Beautiful fish. But species of line has a lot to do with what I'm doing here. I can feel everything. I want to feel that crankbait. I want to make sure it's running true. If you see my rod tip, you can tell that that bait's running true. And you know, we're encountering rocks and weeds and zebra mussels and all sorts of things. I want to make sure that bait's always running true. If it's not, I can give it a few snaps. A lot of times, even if I hit weeds, I just snap it a couple times. That rod's flexible enough, snaps those weeds out of there, and I can run it back to the boat. But man, great smallmouth. You know, it's almost like trolling crankbaits. You want to know how that crankbait's running by watching that tip. And look at that tip run. I know that bait runs true. And a lot of that has to do with the line species I'm using. You know, that braid fluorocarbon combination, I can feel everything in that rod tip. It just loads up so nice. It's so soft. It just buries the hooks in the fish's mouth. I mean, been casting this morning just for about an hour or so, and we have not lost a fish once we've hooked up on them. You know, it's pretty incredible. Nice soft rod action, that's what does the trick. Oh, not a bad pike. That's what I mean about being a multi-species bait. You know, anytime you're casting crankbaits, you don't know what you're gonna catch, whether it's pike or muskies or walleyes. That's what's nice about having that rod being able to load up and soft like that. That thing just crushed it right next to the boat. Just loaded up really nice and easy. I didn't have to worry about it snapping off on it or ripping the rod out of my hands. Lots of fun. Oh, not a bad pike, I'll take it. It's just fun casting crankbaits. Like I said, I can't stress enough, you're catching everything, and they're not just hitting it, they're wailing on it. Not a bad little pike. Get this guy back in. Man, I tell you what, if you just want to have a great day on the water, finding fish, learning things, nothing better than casting crankbaits and just covering water. I've literally just started on one reef and just kind of worked my way all the way around. Now, you want to talk about taking the frustration out of casting small, light crankbaits? Tie on a small crankbait on the Legend glass rod from St. Croix, and it's just unbelievable how far you can whip that bait out there and just really cover water. So until next time, I'm Tony Roach. Stay tuned for more Midwest Outdoors.